I'm Anais Fernandez, and I'm here with
Josh Amponsah.
David Ghansah.
And Noah Jockett.
And today, for our Session 1 podcast, we will be talking about cultural appropriation.
So things first, I wanted to start by talking about what is appropriation.
Yeah, we want to make sure that we differentiate between appropriation and appreciation of one culture.
So the way that I understand appropriation, according to main media, is like appropriation is when an individual takes an aspect of a culture that is not theirs and uses it for self-interest and self-gain. While appreciation would be sort of taking the time to acknowledge that something is not of your culture and appreciating it for what it is.
I feel like even with those sort of strict definitions, there's still some controversial areas within those definitions where you can't tell if it's appreciation or appropriation.
Yeah, because sometimes even when people have their best interests in mind and best sort of trying to understand the culture, they cannot know everything or understand why something works the way it does work. And specifically, talking in terms of black culture is very diverse, very unique to itself, and so I think we should take the time to define it into our own understanding.
Well, for me, the biggest definition, Marka, is acknowledgement. When taking from another culture or enjoying another culture, it's important to acknowledge that culture, or at least acknowledge being outside of that culture in order to give it respect, because even in itself, that's going to put a limitation on how you utilize that culture, how you enjoy that culture, consume that culture, in terms of it being inappropriate or disrespectful to some people, a part of that culture. So when there's acknowledgement involved, then there's a clear and concise difference between appropriating black culture and appreciating black culture.
And I think it's also important that other cultures aren't using black culture for their own personal gain. I think that really leads right into appropriation as well.
Yeah, and we also have to take into consider how black culture has influenced historically other cultures, and while, for example, let's take hoops. For those who can't visually see me right now, I'm wearing hoops that say the word warmi in it. Warmi in Quechua means woman. So my hoops say the word woman, but in the end, they're still hoops. And there's a lot of controversy concerning the fact that women who are not black and wear hoops are appropriating it from black culture in the United States. But they fail to realize the Chicana culture and the Brooklyn movement in terms of where, because black people lived in close proximity with Hispanic or Latin people, they sort of exchanged this iconic symbol called the hoops, and it became a part of both of their cultures.
Yeah, that was a great example, actually. But I have a counter example in a slightly different way. So there was this video of Chet Hanks, the son of Tom Hanks, doing a Jamaican accent. And after receiving a lot of backlash, Chet Hanks says that he learned it from a close friend who is Jamaican, and all the Jamaican people love him for doing it and are praising him. However, other people are acting all sensitized like other American people. So where America is being very sensitive about the topic, he's saying he did acknowledge and is being acknowledged by the people of that culture. So what role does the culture of which you are appropriating or appreciating play in validating your use of their culture?
That's interesting. Have people from the Jamaican community and culture spoken and like supported his claim that they are in support of like, or at least haven't rejected him and his accent in the sketch.
Yeah, that's what he says. I'm not sure about the facts though.
Right.
Yeah, and in your situation, it's like a he say, they say, they
Yeah.
support me, who's really targeting me, and that example is one of many of similar situations. And in the end, it's like, if who feels insecure about what is happening, if they're not part of that culture, do they have a say in what is going on? Like, if that is appropriation or appreciation? And I personally don't know the answer, but I feel like if something is wrong and seems wrong to you, it probably is. And it probably means that you're trying to be disrespectful or portraying stereotypes. And while someone from the culture can say, oh, they're just doing a stereotype, we all understand that, someone who does not know anything about that culture can just take that as like it's an okay for them to do it. And even though like you said, they had the support of some of his Jamaican friends, like if you do the accent to someone at all who isn't Jamaican, doesn't know anything about Jamaican culture, it can be like, oh, this is a representation of all Jamaican culture, and this is what I can tell my friends about that.
And I feel like that's where the disrespect and the misuse comes into play, because it's almost similar to blackfishing. And within any community, there's going to be some people who are, I guess, wowed, so they kind of like praise you. For me, I'm Ghanaian, and there's a common thing within the Ghanaian community where, like, if a white person is speaking our language, it's like, oh my gosh, wow, this is amazing. And that white person may see that and be like, ooh, wow, I should take it a different level. I'm Ghanaian now, I'm black, I'm this, I'm that, and immerse themselves into that culture and maybe do some things that other people within the Ghanaian community could feel like, what are you doing? And then his or her response may be, I got the stamp of approval. Everybody likes what I'm doing. So it's like a balance, because at the end of the day, even though you may be accepted into that culture and some people may kind of gas you up, put the battery in your back, at the end of the day, it's dependent upon how, like, when you're within that culture, how are you showing appreciation with respect? How are you showing appreciation with honor to the people who are actually benefit of the culture? Because I can't take off my blackness. I can't take off that identity and put it on the side. I can't switch in and out. This inherits me. I can't change that. But if you have the privilege of being able to do that, then it should also come with the mindset and understanding that you shouldn't misuse it.
Yeah, and going back to what you were saying, we have to, like, whenever we look at these scenarios, we have to do it from an understanding that in this world, the world that we live in, it's Eurocentric right now. And for people who are minorities, or for people who, like with your language example, that also happens in the Quechua community, specifically, like the Quechua language is being extinct in order to within its community. But when a foreigner talks about it, they're like, oh, this is praisal. Now Quechua, we need to support our Quechua people. We need to support our Andean community. But the reality of it is because we're stuck in this sort of like imperialist, colonialist way of thinking. And how do we move outside from that? Well, we can't really do that, but we have to be aware of it right now.
That Eurocentrism also has bled into like music and the arts, because rap and rock and roll have all derived from black improvisational music, and black improvisational music is more commonly known as jazz, but jazz was at first a derogatory term given to black improvisational music by white audiences. And so often in the music community, these genres are considered lower forms of art because they're not based in tradition. Being a music student myself, I'm so often more encouraged to engage in classical literature, as they call it, because it's more professional in their eyes. And at this point, jazz is included in that, but it's because white European culture has appropriated black improvisational music into their own culture without respecting its own origins.
Yeah, and I think that's really important to know because when, like you said, when white musicians perform rap or jazz or rock and roll, they're praised for it. Like, this is amazing, you're a genius. But when black creators do that, there's always like a negative response, negative feedback. Oh, this is ghetto, or this is not real, this is not authentic, this is not genuine. And I've always been confused about that. Like, I already know it's a product of anti-blackness, but I've always been confused about that notion, because why are the originators getting so much hate, but the appropriators getting so much love?
Yeah. Well, and even past that, when black musicians do choose to perform classical literature from Eurocentric traditions, then they're beyond praised because they're considered to be performing something greater than what they usually would. And that itself is just a disrespectful way to view musicianship in general, and especially musicianship within the black community.
That actually just gave me an idea. So, is it possible to appropriate white or European culture? Because in a sense, from colonialism and like the fact that it's been very Eurocentric, the world has been for a while now. That kind of positions Europe as like the center of the world, as like the center of culture, like the cultural base of humanity. So in that case, if we're all connected by this Eurocentricity, is it possible to appropriate European culture?
I feel like that's a tough one, in my opinion, because, as you mentioned, it's been imposed on pretty much everyone. So, like, their baseline mindset understanding always works within that colonized mindset. So it's like, how do you find that, that, oh, this is an appropriation, unless it's like current new, like this is something that's culturally new from white people, then it's like, okay. But historically, I don't know.
Yeah, to answer my own question, I would say no, because I'm thinking about it. I'm racking through my brain, and I can't think of a single instance in which anything has been called European, like, cultural appropriation. Because at that point, it's just like doing something.
Mm-hmm.
Right, because if the majority is already, if the cultural majority is already doing something, then, like, I don't think it's able to be appropriated because it's not being used for someone else's benefit in the disrespect to them. Like, it's a really difficult thing to define, actually. I'm trying to think of an example.
Well, while you think of an example, I completely agree with you, Josh. I don't think white culture can be appropriated because it is the popular culture, the majority culture. It is just an intermix of everything else. But I think things like Caucasian culture can be appropriated, specifically due to its history of, like, having their sort of own traditions And there's a difference between, for me at least, there's a difference between being white in the United States versus being Caucasian, because being Caucasian has like roots in Europe, Western Asia, just general Asia, and so they have their own traditions. They know their own culture, while white culture, like I was saying before, is just an intermixing of all the cultures that live in the United States but are predetermined under the white eye or the white majority.
I wasn't able to think of an example, but I think that because of how colonistic and colonial so much of the history of white culture has been, I think it's difficult to say that you can appropriate that culture when they have taken so much from the world itself.
I think it also ties into the concept of like being ethnic, because you know, like you walk into a Walmart, you're looking for something specific, like something that's outside of American culture, outside of European culture in general. There's an ethnic foods aisle at almost all of these popular places, and it's just because like anything outside of is ethnic, and so it's like that kind of like other. You can't appropriate something that is outside of the other. Like it's not in the same group as the other, so it doesn't get that like specific distinction that like something else would.
Yeah. Continuing with your idea, do you know like Goya Foods?
Yeah.
It's an American brand, right?
Yeah.
And I remember while all of this
supported Trump.
Supported Trump even, but when you walked out, because a lot of Mexicans, a lot of like Hispanic folk buy Goya products, they started putting it down like the Latino aisle, and it's like, Goya is an American brand. Goya is literally American food. How is it ethnic? How is it supposed to be a part of Latin American culture, or Latin American foods, I should say?
Yeah, that actually brought me, like, unlocked the memory for me. So I was applying for a job at World Market, right? Because I actually really enjoy going there. I think it's very cool to see all that stuff in one place. But then I found out like who the parent organization was. It's called Kingswood Capital Management, and I'm pretty sure they own like Home Goods, Pottery Barn, Bed Bath and Beyond. And I was just like, that just took all the excitement out of it. I was like, I want to work somewhere cool. Like World Market is cool, but if it's in the same league as like Home Goods and Pottery Barn, like these are American places. These are like, I don't even know how to explain it, but it just drained me.
It like whitewashed the.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. It was kind of like, I don't know. I feel like the biggest thing about cultural appropriation that kind of sets people off is that it's sort of like a speculation, like almost like a superiority complex, where I'm above you, so I can enjoy your stuff, and then I can look at you and observe you like you're something else other than me. Kind of like, I don't want to say someone who goes to a zoo and is like looking at the animals, but like that's what it feels like.
That was
sometimes.
The exact analogy that was running through my mind. Said it. Like, yeah. I think
it's tiring.
We probably need to wrap up. So if we have any other closing statements.
How can we summarize everything we just talked about? Like first and foremost, the difference between appropriation versus appreciation. I think I remember David saying was respect for the culture and acknowledgement, and Anais said acknowledgement that it's not yours.
And not abuse of the culture.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming up.